Truth Barista is a production of High Beam Ministry and uses the imaginary Ersatz coffee shop as its platform to bring you a conversation about a plethora of scintillating topics. We don't shy away from any issue that is plaguing our culture or the church today, whether it's current cultural issues, questions about Bible verses, or even just some banter to encourage you. Dr. Jay Christensen is the Truth Barista, and he and amazing Larry Kutzler brew up highly caffeinated conversations for our day. Grab a cup of joe, plop yourself down in the booth next to us, and get ready to think. The Truth Barista is a production of High Beam Ministry, and it's listener supported. For more information about the Truth Barista, go to highbeamministry.com. Thanks for listening. Well, here you go, boys. I hope you like the freshly thawed out muffins. I was cleaning out the freezer in the kitchen yesterday, and I thought it's time to use them. Holler if you need something.
Hey, thanks, Lindsay. Appreciate it. Here at the world-renowned Ersatz Coffee Shop.
Wow. Now, that's an interesting introduction there, Dr. J. You mean this coffee house is world-renowned?
Well, in my world, how about yours?
Well, I spend a lot of time here, me and my dirty apron, and meeting a lot of very interesting people. And, of course, having a weekly conversation with you, which is absolutely wonderful. We sit down at this anointed booth in the Ersatz Coffee House, and we talk about, well, life. And I think today we're going to talk about lessons of a father.
That's right. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about sailing, and we're going to talk about the troubles of life here in the imaginary coffee shop. I've got, well, frankly, it was kind of birthed out of the fact that I've got a friend going through some really terrible times right now.
Right. Well, we also want to say that what we're going to talk about is truth from the scriptures. And that's not imaginary at all.
No, this is real life. This is truth, relevance, and a shot of humor that we put into this as well. So for our listeners who are in the booth next to us here, listening in on our conversation, hey, by the way, if there's anything about this program that you really like and you'd like to comment on, this is sponsored and produced by High Beam Ministry, highbeamministry.com. Send us an email at highbeamministry@gmail.com. We'd love to answer your questions or minister to you in whatever way possible. But for now, let's talk about my friend.
Okay, I love to talk about your friends as long as I'm not one of those people you're going to talk about. But go ahead.
No. My friend is going through a really, really difficult time right now. I don't really want to get too much into the specifics, but basically it's kind of an event in his life that hit him out of the blue. Now, I know that you and I have gone through these types of things in our lives where suddenly a circumstance pops up that we did not see coming and it broadsides us. It's kind of like getting T-boned in a car. You think you're going along the road just perfectly straight and you're doing a great job. And then all of a sudden, bam, it comes along and stops you dead in your tracks. And sometimes a car accident or something like that can have a profound effect on how you view life, where you think you're going, where you thought you were headed, and your life can be radically transformed in an entirely different situation, different direction. And so I'm watching him going through that, but it started me thinking about how God directs our lives. And if God is sovereign, there's really nothing that comes to us but that first goes through his hands. Okay, that's my premise. Okay, so even if I fall into a circumstance, he knows that I'm going through it and he'll help me through it. But sometimes he allows a circumstance to strike us in such a way that it stops us dead in our tracks and then redirects our lives. The verse that came to my mind was Proverbs 16, verse 9. A man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. As I was thinking about what this guy went through, my dad had a great phrase that described this type of thing. It was called the significant emotional experience.
He even named it that? Wow.
He does. And it's interesting because sometimes when I refer to it, it's the SEE. Sometimes a significant emotional experience opens your eyes and helps you see a new vision for your life or a new direction for your life. Now, where my dad first said this is he was talking about criminals. You get these career criminals, and he says, you know what they need? It's like, well, for some guy who likes to steal a lot, maybe they need a 2x4 upside the head.
See, now that's my dad's, he didn't name it fancy words or acrostic or anything like that. He just said, boy, you need a slap upside your head.
Yeah, exactly. I perfectly understand this. I mean, you and I remember, actually, when both of us were living in the Twin Cities at the time, when the George Floyd riots took place. And we just sat there and watched the news for 3-4 days straight as it's like everybody was wilding. They were just running amok. And they were burning things, and they were rolling over cars and standing in the middle of highways, obstructing traffic. And I just turned to my wife. I said, the vast majority of those young people there need a significant emotional experience. and she just laughed. She said, yes, they do. But sadly, they didn't get it, but other people did. But I'll tell you what, it redirected a lot of people out of the Twin Cities area from here on out because they just couldn't take what was going on. So what was not given to the rioters, a significant emotional experience, actually came to people, and their lives were redirected as they reassessed, is this a safe area for my family? Is this the place I want to stay?
Well, I think your theme reminds me of something that I have always held dear to, and that is I learn more by my mistakes than I do by my successes. My successes usually are, yay! And my mistakes, I got to stop and think about them. What could I have done differently? So it's a different mindset. And out of that mistake, even though it may be painful, I learned not to do it again.
Right. And pain is a tremendously good teacher. It's not enjoyable, but it's a very effective teacher, which is why God allows these significant emotional experiences to whoop us upside the head to, number one, get our attention, and number two, to open our ears and our eyes, and number three, to redirect our steps. Sometimes you can get so stuck in stinking thinking or self-destructive ways that we require something so traumatic to happen to us that it stops us dead in the water. It's kind of like getting a canoe paddle upside the head. Something like that.
I mean, it's a good reminder. I know an older couple whose husband had died, and it actually was tragic and very painful. There's a lot of mourning, but then it opened the door for this lady who was a very good Bible teacher to expand her horizon. So even something as tragic as a death could actually be an opportunity for the future. And I'm not just trying to make something good out of something bad. It is what happens.
That's right. And that's really the encouragement that we want to give to our listeners today, is that though tragedy or a traumatic experience affects your life, sometimes it is God ordained or God allowed in order to get your attention, to stop you in your tracks, to begin to redirect you, to speak to your spirit, to speak to your mind as he ignites his word in your heart and mind. I got to tell you, this guy that I know is going through this experience right now, he's been texting me repeatedly, and just over a couple of weeks, you would be amazed at his spiritual insights. He's talking a career change at this point. Now, some people say don't make a career change after a traumatic event or make big decisions after a traumatic event. Well, I agree with that to an extent. On the other hand, at least let it begin to foment new thoughts and directions in your mind as you're now open to God. Where am I at? What am I doing? What haven't I been doing? What direction do you want to take me? What areas in my life do I need to expand? Most of us need a significant emotional experience to shake us from something even as benign as having our lives on autopilot. Maybe we've settled into a career path that we think we'll follow for decades. Well, surprise! Did you know that a recent survey revealed that the average person will now change careers 5 to 7 times during their working life, according to the change statistics? And according to Careers Advice Online, 30% of the workforce will now change careers or jobs every 12 months. Now, if you think you're going to be, on this golden path for your whole life, whether it's a career or whatever, sometimes the Lord says, I've got a better plan. Your heart plans your way, but but I'm going to direct your steps. So I'm going to bring this significant emotional experience, SEE, to help you see where I'm redirecting you. And that's where my friend is at.
Well, I do think that most of us, the majority of people, I think, as the older they get, they slide into sort of a neutrality. I don't want to make waves. I don't want to speak out. I don't want to address that in my neighborhood because I don't want to be tagged, or I don't want to be cancel cultured, or whatever the case may be. But we don't want to create waves, so we sit in neutrality. I don't think, Dr. J, that God's body is supposed to be neutral. I thought we had to be active, going into all the world with his gospel and speaking it out, not living in neutrality.
As you're mentioning that, I'm thinking about our own nation, too, is the vast majority of people who are in our nation are either nominal Christians, or they're on fire Christians, or open to Christianity. And it is amazing how we all kind of just sit back as Christians, as churches, as pastors, and we kind of let life go on. And especially pastors, it's just, it's day after day, counseling, prepping, teaching, schmoozing with other pastors, getting out in the community. And it becomes kind of a day-to-day, run-of-the-mill kind of an existence. But then every once in a while, bam, something hits us. Well, look at our nation. Things have gotten so bad in our nation, morality-wise, and just anti-Christian stuff, that this is becoming a significant emotional experience for the nation that I think the Lord is going to use to bring forth either a revival, a renewal. We see this all the time in church history. Christians begin to relax and coast, then societies begin to degrade, and after a while it becomes so bad that God comes in, bam, with a significant emotional experience on a society level, and suddenly through this upheaval, God begins to renew that society. And really the image of that, or an example of that, is ancient Israel. I mean, they relaxed, they fell into idolatry, but what did God do to the Israelites? He said, if you get into this, I will give you a significant emotional experience you will not forget. The northern kingdom of Israel, he brought the Assyrians in. He wiped them out. To the southern kingdom of Judah, he brought in the Babylonians. They came in, and it was devastating. It's nothing to laugh about or make light of. People were killed through warfare, disease. They were exiled to Babylon. But when Judah came back, mostly from their exile, some 70 years later, idolatry was not an issue anymore for Israel. They stayed the path. Now they had other struggles, but that exile was a significant emotional experience to purge and redirect them into the path that God wanted them to go, because he was planning to bring the Messiah through them, and he needed a nation that was not wrapped in idolatry to do so.
It's so good. I can give you another example from the New Testament, because we want to be equal opportunity expounders, right?
Exactly.
But look at the church in Acts. It was comfortable. They were reaching the Jews in their neighborhood around Jerusalem. All of a sudden, there was Stephen's death. All of a sudden, there was this explosion of persecution, and the believers went everywhere. And Antioch was a place which was multicultural, and that was where Paul and Barnabas sprang into action and went into all the rest of the world, or his world at that time anyway, with the gospel. But it came out of persecution. God allowed that so that the gospel would not stay in Jerusalem.
Exactly, because Jesus said, take this to all the nations. In other words, it's not just a Jewish faith. It is a Jewish faith that's now going to move out into the Gentile realm. And you're right, came the significant emotional experience of persecution. Boom, it redirected the whole body of believers. Another one, too, on a more individual level. Look at Paul. And he's on the direction to persecute the church. And next thing you know, bam, he gets knocked off the horse and he becomes the persecuted.
Yeah, but you know something that's interesting? I wrote a blog about that the other day, and I realized he was the first bounty hunter that the New Testament mentions, right? He was a bounty hunter.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Why do we need this significant emotional experience, or why does the Lord allow it? It's because he's promised to lead us and guide us in the way that we should go. I love Isaiah 30, verse 21. It says, "And whenever you turn to the right or to the left, your ears will hear this command behind you. This is the way. Walk in it." And there are times in our lives when we're not listening to the Lord and we just keep moving forward and we decide we want to choose our own path. And every once in a while, God has to, metaphorically speaking, box our ears and say, "Now stop. You got to go in a different direction here." Here's another one that I like, and it's from Psalm 32. It says, "I will instruct you and show you the way to go. With my eye on you, I will give you counsel. Do not be like a horse or a mule without understanding, that must be controlled with bit and bridle, or else it will not come to you." I tell you what, if you're that stubborn horse or mule that needs a bit or a bridle to direct you, then what's going to happen is you get to a point where the Lord wants you to change directions, or you've come to a standstill, or you're just kind of moving straight ahead. And what he's going to do is going to yank on that bridle, and it's not going to feel very good, but it'll get you where he's going. Now, I actually have kind of an analogy to this that came to me very much along the lines of what this friend of mine is going through. Now, I've been reading the book, The Odyssey, and there's a lot of sailing in that book. Ulysses is sailing hither and yon and blown back and forth. And it reminded me of growing up on a lake. And I was very proficient with a canoe. I could sail a small sailboat, but my favorite was the pontoon, right? It was the party barge. You'd take the pontoon out and go swimming out in the middle of the lake. Well, because the lake was big enough, I'd be able to just kind of set the helm, and I'd sit there and have lunch as the boat kind of just went in the straight direction. Well, I'd be heading towards some shallow water where I knew were some rocks, and I'd start to steer. Well, every once in a while, the cable on the steering mechanism would stick. So I'd have to go back and I'd have to kick the motor to readjust the rudder to get the course correction, lest I actually wreck the engine on the rocks that were only in a few feet of water. So all of a sudden, as I was thinking about this significant emotional experience, all I could think of is, this is the time when the rudder needs to be kicked. A kick to our life's rudder gets us to change course. And so often, for many of us Christians, we're just going along. I'm just living life. I want to be left alone. And God says, "No, I have something better for you. But first, I'm going to have to kick your rudder." And that's when he allows this significant emotional experience to come in. And it just whops us upside the head. And with that, he gets us to change course. I can see you grinning over there.
Well, when I first saw what you're talking about came from a blog you wrote, which is on your website, by the way. But when I first read the title, I thought, what is he going to talk about? Sibling rivalry? Kicking the rudder? I mean, the runt of the family? Then I thought, that's not what he's talking about. So anyway.
No.
That's for another day.
Course correction.
Yeah, that's for another day.
Although I did have an older brother who sometimes kicked my rudder. But anyway, that's beside the point. Well, there are a lot of examples in my own life. I was on track to be a medical doctor, and I was in biology major at the University of Minnesota, and calculus, oh my gosh, it just killed me. And that was a rudder kick, and I changed my major to theater and speech communications. Go figure.
But I got to interrupt here. Your dad, he must have just gone nuts when you did that. Because he's a pharmacist, he's a medical person, and he's probably jumping up and down. My son's going to be a doctor. And then you think of all the poor actors and actresses in Hollywood before they get famous. They're just living like nothing, So he must have had a fit.
No, he didn't. He said, "I am never going to push my son in a direction that he is not supposed to go."
Okay.
And number two, he's that kind of guy. He was an encourager. He said, "Find your way." And by the way, he continued to pay for my education. Thank you very much, Dad. My biggest supporters. And so I made this course correction. Now, in the middle of all that, I was dating a young lady for maybe about a year. But I wasn't the best moral character at the time. I was more of an immoral character. Okay. Well, she dumped me. And I thought we were on the way to get engaged. Well, I'll tell you what happened. The night that she dumped me, I sat at my desk and I cried. And then I asked the Lord, you got to show me what I did wrong here. And it was like God was saying, oh, great. That's what I've been waiting for. He showed me very clearly how I had wrecked relationships in the past. And that started a foundation, which led to my wife about 8 months later, me meeting her and getting married a year and a half later. I mean, that was a significant emotional experience the Lord used to redirect my path. She's a very godly woman. I've been married 41 years to her now. And at the same time, I graduated from theater. Guess what? Couldn't find any theater jobs. So God used a significant emotional experience of unemployment to shift me toward ministry. That's happened throughout our lives. Anybody that's hearing us now can say their own stories. God will kick your rudder through a terrible experience, but don't grieve over the experience. Grieve over the pain, yes, but pick yourself up and look at which way the wind is blowing. Maybe you've got a stuck rudder on your sailboat of your life, and God has to come in and give it a boot in order to swing everything around so that the sail now catches the wind, and the Lord of the wind can begin to blow you where the captain wants you to go, not where you were planning on going.
Who was it? I'm just going out the top of my head. I know it's in the book of Job. Why should we accept the good things from God and not the negative things, right? I mean, there is something about, if we stay stuck into, oh, God is always positive. I'm going to live in a positive world. Nothing's going to ever happen to me. Well, you're living a kind of a dream that doesn't exist.
Right. Well, I think one of the fallacies out there, especially amongst, starry-eyed Christians, is so long as I keep to this one path here, everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to be stable. I need to avoid conflict. I need just, my life will be happy and prosperous as I go forward. And I'm thinking to myself, are you actually living life? Do you know anything about life? Because as much as we try to avoid things, God says, no. Life comes with difficulties and troubles. The Bible is very honest about that. Job says, humanity is born to trouble, will experience trouble as surely as the sparks fly upward from a fire. We just have to make sure that when the fire comes, we don't look at it as just destructive, but it brings warmth. Mm-hmm. It brings nourishment. If you cook over that fire, you get a problem in your life that comes up, that significant emotional experience. Take that moment to sit down with the Lord as long as it takes to do that introspection under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. Lord, what do you want to burn out of my life? Lord, what do you want to, by the light of the fire, how are you going to direct me in the darkness of my life at this time? And we're mixing metaphors all over the place, so we've got this big metaphor stew going, but you got the point.
Well, I have to admit, I had to resign from a church because of tensions and all kinds of things that didn't work well, and I'm sitting there going, God, you called me here. Why is it ending like this? And the first thing I got after I left that church, I got into media, and it was one of those moments, a slap upside the head. Hey, this is not where I want you to be, regardless of I called you here. I've got more for you. That's the key. I got more for you. And my path of media and production and everything else took off. And that was 23 years ago or more.
Yeah. So in our imaginary coffee shop, you may be the kitchen help and I may be the manager, but in reality, I'm the host and you're my producer. So see how that works? Made in heaven.
Well, that's a reality check, Dr. J.
And you have not regretted a day of it since, right? Right. Okay, moving right along.
You're listening to the Truth Barista Show, where your steamy cup of God's truth is never empty.
I guess if we're going to land the plane, seeing as we're going from ships to fires to planes now, if we're going to bring the ship into port, there we go. We have to make sure that when these things come to us in our lives, that we are prepared to field these things, that we're prepared to, the adjustments in the wind, the changes of the weather. And if God comes in and put us into a full stop mode for a minute while the wind is shifting and then directing us into another direction, we need to look upon that as a blessing and not a curse. Because look at all the people who had their lives changed despite the pain of the transition. All these Bible characters, God used difficulties to kick their rudders. For example, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God used famines to move them into the next step of his plan or to the next part of their lives. God used an infuriated, murderous brother, Esau, to steer Jacob into Jacob's training ground with Laban. Look at Moses. Moses is on track to become most likely the next Pharaoh of Egypt. And yet through the difficulty of a misguided attempt to become the Hebrew's favorite, by killing the Egyptian and burying him in the sand, Moses' life is redirected out to the wilderness. So for 40 years, God has him in a stopped point, taking care of sheep. And then after 40 years, God kicks his rudder at the burning bush and says, now I'm turning you back. The wind is swinging, and I'm now going to blow you back to Egypt. And in Egypt, you're going to free my people. So rather than this straightforward line, God took Moses way out to the east and way back to Egypt on a 40-year route in order to have him do what God wanted him to do, which was to be the Israelites' champion. Only God's way, not his way. And that's another reason why God kicks our rudder, because he's going, you're not doing it my way. You're not going in my direction. So this is what you're going to need to get your attention and to redirect your vision. And it's going to take that significant emotional experience. It's been said that clarity is everything, and in our world, finding clarity can be an issue. Hello, I'm Dr. Jay Christensen, and I want to invite you to a weekly conversation where our life and our culture finds clarity through God's truth. We call it the Truth Barista Show. We hope you will join us.
The Truth Barista is a listener-supported ministry that depends on the gifts of listeners like you. Please consider a gift to this Christ-honoring ministry today. Please include the station call letters, or if you're listening online, go to highbeamministry.com. That is highbeamministry.com. While you're on the website, check out all the ministry resources that are available. The blog, the Cruisin' Through the Bible commentary series, online classes, and don't forget to subscribe. We want to keep you informed about all the new series that we create for radio and the podcasts. Remember, we like feedback, so send us an email at highbeamministry.com. The Truth Barista, teaching God's Word as truth for faith and practice. Join us again next week for a cup of God's truth on the Truth Barista.
Hello, I am Maurice. I am the host here at the Here's That's Coffee Shop. I greet you, and I seat you, and I treat you to an excellent cup, a steamy cup of God's truth for the average Joe. You can find us at highbeamministry.com. That's high beams, as in car high beams. highbeamministry.com.
Today, nothing seems normal. Everything is changing, and most changes can be questioned as to how healthy they are for society. God tells us in His Word that the struggles in this world will continue until Jesus Christ returns. Every week on the Truth Barista, we evaluate how faith and the promises of God give us hope in light of our changing world. Do you want the truth today? Dr. Jay Christensen is the Truth Barista and the founder of High Beam Ministry. Jay is a creative person who wants to use the setting of an imaginary cafe to produce a series of radio and internet programs that confront the issues of our day through the lens of the Bible. The Truth Barista was the avenue that was developed to communicate truth using the Bible as the source of our information. The Truth Barista is a production of High Beam Ministry and can be found online at highbeamministry.com.